Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the National Consortium for Data Science DataBytes Lunchtime Webinar Series. Today, our speakers, we have two of them, are Arkat Rajasekar and Howard Lander, both of RENCI, and they will present on DataBridge, a National Science Foundation-funded big data project that explores socio-metric network algorithms to develop clustering of scientific data in multiple modalities. A little bit about our speakers. Dr. Rajasekar, who we call Raja, is a professor in the School of Information and Library Sciences at UNC Chapel Hill, as well as Chief Domain Scientist for Data Science at RENCI. He's also co-director of the Data Intensive Cyber Environments Center at UNC, and a leading proponent of policy-oriented large-scale data management. Raja has several research projects funded by the National Science Foundation, the National Archives, the National Institutes of Health, and other federal agencies. Howard Lander has been at RENCI since April 2005 and has worked extensively there with the application of cyber science and engineering to data-intensive scientific disciplines, including physical oceanography and evolutionary biology. Since 2012, Lander's been a co-PI and software architect on the DataBridge project, an NSF-funded research effort. And today, the talk will last about 30 to 40 minutes, and we'll have time at the end for questions. And as usual, we ask that you hold your questions to the end of the talk, type them into the chat box, and we'll hold them till the end of the talk, read them back to our speakers, and take care of those then. So without further ado, thank you for attending. Welcome, Raja and Howard, and I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Karen. Okay, welcome to the DataBytes workshop. And today, Howard and I will be talking about the DataBridge, a NSF-funded project which we started around 4 years back. It was a big data project under the NSF Big Data umbrella. And then we continued that with another small grant for application in neuroscience. So this talk will basically split into 4 different parts. First, we'll talk about the problem which made us do this particular project, and then the vision of the project, and then talk about the process we use to develop the various cyber infrastructure for that, and then finally a few results which we have got over the past few years. So the main problem that we are trying to solve is, you can call it the long tail of data science problem. There are a large number of small projects which are generating a large volume of data, and these data are highly distributed and not easily available to multiple people. Even though NSF has this particular requirement that data be made available for use, how are we going to make sure that everybody else can be able to take it and use them? If you look at in 2011, more than 11,000 awards of medium size, and most of them are single PI type of projects. If you look at individually, these things are very small in scale, but aggregating them together is actually one of the big data. In a sense, a long tail actually is probably bigger than the head of the this curve, as you can see under the in the slide. We call this dark data because it is not available so easily for people to use. They might be available on even if it is available on the repositories, the amount of information, meta information available to make it reusable is not so easy. And many of them go unpublished. You gather data either through instruments or through simulation, use them, write a paper, have your grad students work on it and postgrads work on it, and after that it disappears. So in a sense, what we are trying to do is, how can we have these data available for long term? And not only that, how can you make it available easily so that people can look at them and use them? So if you look at the communities of data which are there, there are a whole bunch of them, as you can see here. And data archives are there and growing, and trying to mediate across them is going to be a big problem. And that is what we are trying to solve here first. So if you look at data sets, we can talk about how we normally look at them. These data sets are, searching in a data set is very hard, even when the collection is really small, and even if it is in one place. And even when the collection is textual, we see that it is not an easy thing to look inside the data set and find whether it is useful to me or not. That's what they say, the 90-10 rule. A scientist spends more than 90% of the time wrangling with the data, trying to get it, gather it, clean it, and so that they can apply it for analysis. And the analysis takes less than 10% of the time. So 90% of the time is spent in data manipulation and trying to find, is the data really applicable to what I am planning to do? So we would like to help in that particular sphere. And how can we do that one? If you look at it, we have multiple ways of normally doing it. We call that the domain of search. How can I find data? Many of them in the textual format, we use what is called the inverse index, keyword-based search. As we do for Google, we just go there and then type in a set of keywords, and boom, you get with a set of results. And some of it are very useful for us, and then we use that. Internally, it uses what is called the bag of words and term frequencies and other types of things to find out which particular web page is of interest to you. And when we go to a slightly more structured data, such as in relational databases or in XML databases or RDF type of thing, then you have structured queries like SQL, SQL, and things like that, which help you in finding out what is inside the data, so that you will be saying, yeah, okay, I can use that. And many of the time, that is where it stops. In a sense, you have all these big collections, and they will have these some database which contains information about the files in there, and you can do some sort of a SQL query on that particular one and then find out what data is in there. It basically doesn't tell what is inside the data, which basically has some meta information about the data, and you just use that. You may do something like the DICOM metadata or the FITS metadata or EML, and then you might be able to look at the attribute and the value for that particular one, and then get information about that. Semantic web is a slightly more complicated one, where you use RDF type of thing, and you can do faceted search and path query search and things like that, so that you may get a little bit more information, but basically at web page level. And you might go deeper into it and do some page ranking and indexing, as is done by Google, Yahoo, and other search engines. But in reality, when we look at scientific data, you need to have more than what we can do in any of those type of things which are there. So you need to explore new modes of search, extend beyond the keywords and the metadata and the type of things which we have seen before. And what we call that as create new domains of search. We look at it, the domains of data sets are there, but most of the time you cannot go directly into the data set and try to find out if the data set is useful to me or not, because that is more time consuming than you have. So instead of that, you would like to take that and then map it into another domain called the domain of search, where your search can be simpler and easier and things like that. So mapping from the domain of data set to multiple domains of search is probably an important thing. And that is one of the key things which motivation for the DataBridge. And how do you get these type of new domains of search is basically by applying, we call them as domain-centric capabilities. So you might have different algorithms which you have already used for looking into the data sets, maybe make those algorithms available, and then you can then use them for trying to do these type of things. So the idea is venture beyond exact searching. And if you look at it, SQL is exact in its nature. You get exactly the same answer again and again for the same type of query. But can you explore similarities? Can you explore clustering type of thing? Using of semantic distances is what we're looking. So not only we are extending the new modes of search beyond the normal textual type of thing and metadata type of thing, but also trying to say, okay, can I not only do exact search, but also do similarities based on search. You will see as we go forward how we are doing it. So the motivation for DataBridge is basically it has been like if you look at the olden times, people were using white pages, yellow pages, and trade publications to find out about people, find out about companies, find out about what is happening and things like that. But if you look at the past 10 years or so, we got a rich amount of information which is available. You can call them as rich set of connections provided by websites like LinkedIn, ResearchGate, Facebook, and all that, which use multiple ways of taking the data and linking them together, like work-related data or education-related data, friends, or events and timeline. And you also have other socio-metric connections, like one person endorses another person or likes another person, follows another person, and so on and so forth. And you get this type of rich amount of information. And we call them as social networking. And it is basically connections of connections of connections is what is happening in there. And the main idea is that can we take these type of things and apply it to data so that we can find communities of data and find what is called virtual community formations in the data itself, and can we take advantage of that one? And what is a community? What is a data community, and how do we define multiple types of community? If you look at normal LinkedIn and Facebook and all that, the communities are basically like friends or people who work in the same place or who went to the same universities or colleges, and they have the same type of skills or the same type of profiles and hobbies and things like that. And we would like to do something very, very similar for data sets also. Okay, this data set is about something, and I can use that in where. For example, I might be able to look at multiple MRI images and then say these can be defined based on the diseases which are found through these MRIs. Maybe this is about Alzheimer's disease, and this is about other disease, and so on and so forth. So our vision of DataBridge is basically to assist scientists in discovering interesting data by automatically forming these communities of data. Communities of data based on like disease is one part of it, but something similar to that. And domain scientists can create their own search algorithms defining these type of what is meant by interesting. In a sense, if you look at how we do that in Google, we go and give a keyword and then get back this one. What happens, how is the keyword being used is completely a black box in a sense for us. But here we want to make it more generic and more useful and more user-friendly, is that you can create your own algorithm, search algorithm, and say, hey, I would like to apply this algorithm instead of just looking at a generic keyword type of thing. And internally they might be using page ranking, inverse indexing, and so on and so forth. But can I have my own way of searching so that I can go and find interesting? And that is the vision of DataBridge. And using these two things, the concept of interesting and concept of interesting to a particular individual, and the building an extensible, adaptable platform for building these communities of data. And once you have these communities of data, then you can search relevant data sets through these multiple types of linkages. And here on the right-hand side, you will see one of the linkages which we had on one of our very early type of data, which we went together. The nodes of this data basically tells about different types of, I think in this particular case, the data is taken from the Dataverse network. So it is basically surveys, and the thickness of the link tells about how related they are. And if you go and find out, click on a particular link, it will tell how similar these two data sets are and things like that. So that is what we are looking at, so that you might be able to take a data set and say, hey, find me everything which is very similar to that, and then it'll tell you a whole community which can be attached to that based on what we meant by a similarity measure. And you can have multiple different kinds of similarities. My similarity might be different than your similarity, and you can easily do that. It's exactly like I want work-related similarities or friends-related similarities or hobby-related similarities. You have the same type of concepts coming into this picture. So our vision, in a sense, going is from mapping of domains of data sets to domains of search. And you can see that there is a progression coming here. So we take the domains of data, convert them into what we call as metadata. Even though we call them as metadata, these are basically something which has been taken by applying some algorithms to the data and then converting them into this metadata. And these metadata can in turn be again transformed or mapped into what we call as signatures. And these signatures are the one which are where they are, you can call them as domains of search and then domains of similarities in a sense. and then you can talk about how similar they are, how close they are in there. So in one way, we can look at the domains of data have some hidden relationships among these data sets. And then when we come back to the domains of search, you are exposing these relationships as part of these particular types of signatures. And you can have multiple different types of signatures. I call them as different planes on which you want to look at it. In one plane, you look at a set of data, or in another plane, you look at a set of data, and you can migrate from one plane to another plane, like you do in a faceted search. The only thing is the facets here are not the ontological facets which you normally see in science, but basically algorithmic facets, which we are going to apply here. So if you look at it, basically we apply multiple types of algorithms to do this type of thing. There are like I said, if you look at our previous thing, we have a progression from data to the similarity discovery space. We basically do that one. That's what you're seeing here in this particular slide, with basically the graphic on the right showing that you can have more than one way of finding similarities. The red similarities are the black similarities between the same set of nodes and how they are related in there. And going a little bit more into how we do that, we can have multiple types of metadata. That's where the power of the DataBridge comes in. We can talk about how data sets are related to each other directly based on their own metadata, or scraping them from the web, maybe looking at some information which is directly derivable, which is directly available through the data set itself. Or it can be from metadata and comparing with ontologies or that. Or you can also have how a data is used, either as an input data or as a data which came out of a particular process, or who has used it. Will be another one which provides us with a different type of linkages. Like we said, when we look at Facebook and LinkedIn and so on, you have friends and colleagues and things like that. You can look at the same type of thing, linkages which can come here. But the most interesting thing which is provided by the DataBridge is the last one, called deep indexing, where a scientist can provide a domain-specific algorithm and say, hey, take this algorithm not as an algorithm for doing analysis, but convert that into a search algorithm. So we are mapping a normal thing which a scientist might be using as a analytic algorithm and convert them into a search algorithm, and then use that thing and apply it to all the data sets and see how similar they are and what are the differences which we come through. So the signatures are also really important when we are looking at it, and we have multiple types of signatures. You can have a list of keywords as a signature. That's what happens in the case of Google, or in the case of any other library science type of thing, is a list of keywords, and then you can go and look at particular things. And you can do a little bit more a natural language type of analysis, either using entropy weighted bag of words or things like that. Or if you go into more scientific data, you can look at eigenvectors, like eigenfaces, and so that you might be able to go and do some sort of a pattern analysis, and then use those type of things to find out. And similarly, waveforms is another way of doing it. So you can look at these as signatures and then use these things in your thing. How do we form these signatures? Again, the scientists can provide their analytic algorithms, which can be basically used for these type of things. And here is one of the things which you can try to do is have a Wordle algorithm, which might take a data set which happily happens to be textual, and you are not only looking at just a bag of words, but you can also look at the weighted list of bag of words, so that you can compare one cloud to another cloud, and then say, hey, this cloud is very similar to that cloud because a few of these things are relatable and forms the same thing, type of thing. And our process of similarity is basically can be of multiple ways. We have encoded multiple different types of similarity, as you can see, the Lin similarity or the cosine similarity, and different types of alignment, so that you can look vector alignment, waveform alignment, and or sequence alignments, like we are doing in a DNA sequence type of thing, or it can be on any Riker scale or something like that, so that you might be able to say how similar they are and how close they are type of thing. So they might be numeric, or it can be an orthogonal similarity, or it can be in an ordinal type of similarity. You would like to pull them together into clusters and then look at them as a cluster. So trying to view data as a cluster is a really important way of doing things, and which is not normally available when we go and try to find data sets in a repository. So you might go to PubMed and then look at it. The way you find data in PubMed is basically by using keyword-based metadata search. But what happens in the something like DataBridge is that you actually go deeper into the data and try to get a little bit more information than that. And finally, once you have these type of similarities in there, you can use these type of similarities to obviously as a semantic distance metrics and do multiple types of clustering in there. And you see a few of them over here. What it means is that we have coded all these things as part of the good old DataBridge platform, so that you don't need to do those things. Many of these things are already available. And actually, one of the experiments we did is to find out which similarity algorithm are the similarity algorithms by themselves are similar or not. And actually, later on when Howard goes through some of these results, you will see that, hey, they are not the same. And you can actually see that similarity algorithms are not similar in a sense. So I think I'm going to stop here and give the mic to good old Howard so that he can talk about the real nitty-gritty details of how it got implemented and what we did with the platform.
Well, I'm not going to get into too many details because, frankly, probably nobody but me actually cares. I think, yeah, I can do it with this version. But I will say a few words about first of all, that to the surprise of some people, we've actually done this, and so we've actually built both I gave a talk at this about AGU, the American Geophysical Union conference a couple of years ago, and at the end of the conference, at the end of the talk, which went about as far as Raja went, somebody stuck up their hand and they said, but have you actually done this? And at which point I realized perhaps I needed a couple more slides to explain that, yes, we've actually done it. So here's a couple of the slides that show how we've done it, and then later some slides about the results, some of which are kind of interesting. Basically, the DataBridge is sort of divided up, right? I mean, there's a number of different servers and services that can be applied. And various things are stored. So for instance, we store the metadata in a thing called MongoDB. That's generally the similarities and the signatures. Now, it wouldn't have to be MongoDB. And in fact, we've implemented something called data access objects as a pattern. So you can change it underneath, change the underlying technology, and it really doesn't matter to like 90% of the code. But in fact, we store our metadata in Mongo. It's used a schema based on something called DDI Lite, if anyone's interested in that. Once we produce the actual similarity, the actual network data, that we store in Neo4j, which is a network database, an open source network database. And it's got its uses, and this is one of them. The majority of the code is written in Java. The interesting part is that, as Raja said, users can provide their own algorithms at several, in fact, all 4 major steps in the process. And there isn't the requirement that those algorithms be in Java. The only requirement is that those algorithms be able to conform to an interface. Now, at the moment, for a couple of the steps, it has to be Java, but that's just because we haven't got an example where somebody really wants to do it in Python or some other language. And as soon as we have an example of that, then we'll go ahead and set it up so that works. It won't be very difficult. We're doing sort of a just-in-time architecture here. But the other interesting thing about this is that it's all based on message passing, and rather than say a web service where you have to know where the endpoint is. In this case, the internal parts of the DataBridge don't really need to know where everything else is. They send a message out on the message bus, and whoever's listening to it can handle it. Now, in practice, that's not so much how it happens, but in any case, we sort of think of this as a self-assembling workflow, right? Or an opportunistic workflow where out comes a message, and you don't really quite know who's going to handle it, but you have some idea what the results are going to be. And of course, the people who handle the message have to handle it in a way that makes sense for the system. So we don't really truly expect people other than our core team to be building these services, but you don't know, and so we've planned for it.
You can skip some steps also. In a sense, you may directly go into data format.
Yeah. It does. You're right. It's not actually, the order is not guaranteed or required.
That's why it's not a workflow. It is opportunistic workflow.
Yeah, that's a good point. So the other thing that's kind of interesting is we did build a front end to this thing. It's almost, it's about 80 or 85% done. And we really used it, we really built this more as a demonstration than anything else, because the way we really expect in the long run for the DataBridge to be used, or at least one of the modalities we expect it to be used in, is sort of the DataBridge as a service, where the idea is somebody would have an existing product, like, for example, we work with the Skiz Connect folks, and they might put a button on their interface that says, okay, I've selected this data set, and now I'd like to search in the appropriate DataBridge networks to see the most similar data sets. And then that data set and that button might generate, in fact, at the moment, it probably would generate a web service call rather than a message. But that's just because we needed a remote procedure call sort of paradigm, because we need the data to come back to the person who asked for it. But in any case, that prototype web app is built using the mean stack. So it does Mongo and Express, it does Angular and Node. And we ended up writing some stuff in AMQP so that we could hook up our message-based interface to the mean stack stuff, because that wasn't built in. Let's see what we have here. And this is actually the result that I showed as a direct result of the person asking me this question at AGU. So this is just a basic slide. It shows a web app that one of our collaborators, Hong Yi, wrote. And it shows just some results. I mean, here's what a network looks like, the visualization of a network. And it's from the Odom Institute's version of the Dataverse, which, as Roger said, means a lot of the data is going to be surveys. And so we just clustered them, right? We ran a basic overlap similarity, and we used a spectral clustering routine. And this is what the output looks like. And you see on the right, the way this is set up is that if you click on a particular node, it brings you back to the web page. I don't know why I'm pointing since nobody can see, but it brings you back to the web page that Odom has for that particular data set. And so assuming that the correct data is there, then you can do it. Oh, it's not live, Roger said. Okay. But we've done a couple other projects, and this is sort of interesting. This is a couple of slides that describe what we've done in a project called the DataBridge for Neuroscience. And this is a project that was funded as an eager by the National Science Foundation. And we worked with several collaborators who are principal in the Skiz Connect project, if any of you are familiar with that. But it's basically a domain-specific archive for schizophrenia data sets. And our collaborators are primarily Li Wang from Northwestern University and Jessica Turner from Georgia State, and Angela Laird at Florida International also. And so they have a bunch of data that is basically patient data about multiple studies about schizophrenics. Now, the interesting thing to remember is, or to emphasize, I should say, is that DataBridge doesn't really store data; it stores metadata. So we don't actually have any problem with privacy in this case. We just got from them metadata without patient IDs. And what they have is, for each patient, well, okay, so they have a large number of studies, okay, or a fairly large number of studies. And each study is composed of a group of instruments. And each of these instruments is, in fact, what they call an instrument, we would call almost a survey. It's a set of questions that they ask, clinical questions that they ask as part of a clinical interview, right? And this would cover things like, I don't know, did you go to college? Are you right-handed? What kind of symptoms are you having? But the interesting thing is that each of these studies, the studies have different names for the instruments, and the instruments are slightly different, but they've managed to do what they think of as ontology-based harmonization. so that you can look at two different studies and they may have slightly different names, but they basically map to the same upper level concept. And so this diagram on the result is on the right, I'm trying to say, is an example of the ontology. So they had the ontology in a spreadsheet. We built it into an actionable RDF-based ontology that you could see on the web if you wanted to. And so you see at the bottom level, there's two different studies, two different instruments. One of them is called EHI, and another one is called a net scale of hand preference. But if you look, okay, they're both subclasses of handedness, and handedness is itself a subclass of clinical. Clinical is the highest level of their ontology, and of course in OWL, and this thing is done in OWL, everything is a subclass of OWL thing, right? And so there you have it. And so we extracted, first we created the ontology, then we created a signature. Now the signature, we defined a signature. The signature is in fact a vector of these high level concepts. And the signature for every study then becomes its vector, right? So based on the ontology, so you run all the, you look at every one of the studies, you look for every instrument, you try to find its match in the ontology, and that match in the ontology, everything that's a subclass of clinical, has a defined spot in the vector, of the signature vector for their work. And so this gives us a way to compare all of the studies, even though they don't have the same things in common.
These studies are distributed, happening in different institutions.
Yeah, that's a good point. So the metadata we all loaded up in the DataBridge, but the studies aren't in the same place. Okay, and so here's how we did the similarity calculation. Well, this should be familiar to many of you, or maybe not. I don't know, but it's basically an edit distance or a Hamming distance, and it's pretty simple. It's just, for every spot in the vector is this concept represented in the study, and then if it is on both studies, then there's no difference. So they're similar in that part of the vector. And you look, it'll tell you the distance for any two studies is the number of places at which the vector is different. Now, we're not really interested in differences. We're interested in similarities. So we had to make a small calculation. So the similarity is just 1 minus the distance over the length of the vector. And I think, if I remember correctly, the length of the vector is order 30, right? And so the matrix on the right, it's important to mention that this similarity calculation happens between every two pairs of studies, right? And so you get, again, I'm pointing, you get a matrix that looks like the matrix on the left, bottom left, which is, which is only 5 studies, but was the first result we have. I think it's up to 12 or 14 studies now. One thing that's interesting about this, if you'll notice, is that the matrix is symmetric. And in fact, when we represent this in Neo4j, we only keep the upper right portion of the matrix because the graph that we're creating is undirected, which is to say that the similarity between NUSDAST and MCI share is the same as the similarity between MCI share and NUSDAST. We don't care.
And the similarity matrix given here actually gives you a little bit more deeper insight into these studies. These studies are done by different people. MCI is done by one group, FBurn is done by another group, and COBRE is done by another group, completely different, and things like that. The main thing to do is that if I want to find out, compare patients from one study to another study, I can easily see that if the similarities between the study are higher, then I will be able to find patients who are really similar.
Yeah.
If the similarities are not at all there, very, very little, then trying to find patients in these two studies together is going to be harder for me. So if you look at it, if I want to find similarities between COBRE and NUSDAST, the similarity is very low, 0.483. Whereas if I am doing between NMorph-CH and NUSDAST, the similarity is really high at 0.862. What it means is that I can find patients in NMorph-CH who are very similar to NUSDAST, but not between Cobre and Buzzfeed.
So what's in?
So it is like a meta information. So when you
Yeah.
drill deeper, this will be a very helpful thing. Don't waste your time doing the other one.
So the other thing that's one other little anecdote is interesting. We actually ran this with, I think the next time we ran it, we had 8 or 10 studies, and I showed it to Jessica, and there were 2 that were very close together, and she said, "Oh, well, that makes sense. Those were done by the same investigator." So, one point that's worth making, and Raja did make it, but let me make it again, is that you're sort of moving into the domain of the approximate here, right? So we hope that it's useful, but we can't prove that, it reminds me of the old fuzzy logic days. Anyway, everything's not exactly what it appears. And to emphasize that, let me show you this. We actually have, like, I think 17 different categorical similarity measures implemented. And there would be more on this chart, but I didn't have room on the slide for all 17, but I just pointed a few. And what this shows you is that here's some different basic strings you could try to compare with these similarity measures. And you can see on the left the name of the algorithm. And so result 1 is 2 is comparing string 1 versus string 2, and 1 versus 3 is string 1 versus string 3. And you'll see the results aren't the same. In fact, they differ fairly dramatically. So this is still, this emphasizes 2 things. First, that this is an art, not a science. And second, the importance of the domain scientists and their input in helping us select the algorithms, right? Let's see, the next slide, if I remember. So this, and just to show you that this is actually important, here's some, here's a visualization, a couple of different visualizations of the clustering and similarity of 100 data sets from clinicaltrials.gov. Everything's the same, except we use 2 different similarity measures. One's the overlap similarity measure, and one's the block distance similarity measure. And if you go back up here, you'll see that overlap and block distance are the first and the last. You can see, in fact, they don't agree, right, on this very simple thing, let alone, what's going on here? There it is. Let alone this, which used the keywords from the clinicaltrials.gov website. And there's usually the keywords are maybe 30, somewhere between 20 and 100, right? So you can see the differences aren't just, oh, that's a little different. The differences are, they can be important. Okay, and there's one other thing that we thought was interesting.
So let me tell you how we did this particular study. Here we're just basically comparing the similarity algorithms, but when we did the project itself, we had a grad student work on this particular one, is go and get around 18,000.
Well, actually, Schaffner did that.
Yeah,
he's not a grad student.
18,000 data sets from clinicaltrials.gov, and then we are looking only at 100 of them, and we basically took that particular 18,000 of them and tried to find a vector out of that. Obviously, we use TF-IDF type of things and cosine vectors and things like that, and try to come up with a signature which can be used across these 18,000 different studies. Then we can use that signatures to compare across them.
Yeah.
So you can see how it can be used in very different ways, right, for doing something.
And so since Roger brings that up, I'll mention another point that I probably wouldn't have otherwise. So thanks. As we mentioned, it's sort of an n-square algorithm because you're doing the you're doing the comparisons on each set of data sets. So people might think, oh my God, 18,000 squared is a pretty large number. And in fact, we had a pretty slow, when we ran the similarity for it, we did a pretty slow similarity measure. But it took about 100 CPU hours, which seems like a lot if you're running it on your laptop. But in fact, I ran it on our cluster downstairs. We've got some functionality built in to do batch processing. And so, 100 CPU hours on 25 CPUs, perfectly reasonable, right? Okay. So this was interesting. Then when we started looking at it, when we realized this, right, then we started thinking to ourselves, well, okay, is there some way to compare these algorithms and try to think about what they mean against each other?
So eat your own dog food, basically.
Yeah. So this is a little meta-analysis. And so we actually executed 17 different similarity algorithms from the keywords of 100 data sets from clinicaltrials.gov. Well, how different are they? Well, what did we do? Well, we went through the same process. Here's the metadata. What's the similarity? What's the signature? Okay, well, in this case, the similarity, the signature for each data set, for each algorithm was its matrix. It's, basically 100 by 100 matrix of similarity that it produced, right? Well, what was how are we going to do the similarity? Well, for each of these pairs, we subtracted one matrix from the other. That just gives, because the matrices are all in the same order, so it gives us, this is what they produced as a difference for each
That uses a vector
position.
to compare now.
Yeah, well, it's actually a matrix, but you can think of it as a vector if you like, because it's just 2D versus 1.
It's a two-dimensional vector.
It's a two-dimensional vector, right?
Yeah.
Right. And we ran a very simple Euclidean matrix norm of the result. Now, I'm not going to explain. I mean, if anyone wants to know what the Euclidean matrix norm is, I'll be happy to explain it, but I'm not going to do it right now. But so we ended up with a meta-similarity matrix, and then of course, being the kind of guys we are, we ran our clustering algorithm on it, and the algorithm and the diagram on the right is what came out, and you notice that several of them are very close, and some of them are a little further away. Now, you have to take this all with a grain of salt, right? Because the clustering algorithms, as my friend Chris Bison is fond of saying, they show you what they think you show, what you think they show them. But here's what's interesting, right? So here's the next chart. And this is basically a graphical representation of that chart. And
tabular representation of the graphics.
What did I say?
You said graphical.
Oh, excuse me. Yeah, this is a tabular representation. Thank you, Roger. This is a tabular representation of the figure. And what you see is on the left, all the ones that are in the dark blue, are the color for the dark blue over there. Okay. And it shows these are the ones that the algorithm said, hey, these should be clustered together. Look at the time difference. Look at the difference in execution time. The most was 163 seconds. The least was 6 seconds. 5 seconds. So which one am I going to use when I have 10,000 or 100,000, right? Similarly, interestingly, the generalized Jacquard was kind of over there by itself. Although, if you look, it's pretty similar and maybe kind of belongs in the dark blue group with its friend Jacquard. So that's not too surprising. But then look at the two brown ones on the bottom right. Look at the difference in their execution time, And similarly, you can see in the greenish group, you can see a significant difference in their execution time as well. Now, again, how much of this clustering, how much of this is really telling us something real? We don't know. And, we're not ready to publish a paper. This is one very preliminary result. And the result itself isn't as interesting to me as the process. The fact that this is the kind of thing you can do when you start thinking about things in the way that DataBridge starts thinking about it.
In a sense, we can say something about this meta information also. So if I'm running it on a large number of data sets, say several 100,000 data sets, I may want to run it using an algorithm which is really fast. But once I have that one and I say, hey, this is what I would like to do, either the blue one or the yellow or the brown one or the green one, once I have said, okay, this is very good for me, and then I can choose, okay, I like the brown one, and then there I can go for the most costlier one if I really want to do it.
Or maybe you pick a subset that you're interested in. Anyway, that's our last slide. So, but thanks for your attention, and we'll be happy to listen to any questions or try to answer any questions.
In a sense, we have been applying the DataBridge for 3 different projects. One is the social science data coming from the Odom Institute. The other one is the clinical trials data coming from clinicaltrials.gov. And the third one is the schizophrenia data coming from the studies linked by the SysConnect repository.
Okay. Thank you very much, Rasha and Howard. We have several questions here. I'm going to read them and give them over to you.
All right.
I think we have 3 or
Okay.
4. So,
Sure.
Keep that in mind so we can get them all answered. First question is, have you taken a look at what might be called a kind of sensitivity analysis to see how many community members do you have to make this work? Is there a threshold of community members below which this doesn't work very well, or how much variance in the metadata to create enough of a network?
Right. I would say we have not done such a thing, but
More data,
but
better the sensitivity.
But not because we don't think it's interesting. It is an interesting thought, and there's all kinds of metrics you can do for clusters. It's just we're not there yet.
In a sense, when we did the clinicaltrials.gov data, We did the 18,000 type of thing, but since it takes a lot of time, we did a lot of them in a smaller subset to show that something is happening. But then we ran a few things with a larger scale also. Again, in real cyber infrastructure, being useful for a larger community, having a lot of data sets actually helps to do that. It's a very good question, actually.
And you know, it's the kind of work we would like to do in the next couple of years as we get more experience. Yeah, I appreciate it.
Okay, next question is, have you done an analysis with users to confirm the effectiveness of your models for similarity? In other words, do users agree and find this useful?
Good question. When we did work with the social science people and they looked at it, at that time we had only a few similarity algorithms. When we showed them the graph which came out of that, I think we used a few of the scikit algorithms for that particular. They were really interested in it. They actually say that yes, this is automatically clustering in a particular way which a human would have clustered.
Right.
So they were happy about why it is putting these things like this and why it is putting it in that particular way. They said, yeah, this makes sense to do it that particular way. Remember, each one of them is exactly like the beauty is in the eye of the beholder. The semantic distance or similarity is in the scientist's own framework.
So, and the only thing I can add to that is that we are writing a paper on our experience with the DataBridge for neuroscience with the neuroscience folks, and there's an evaluation section in there that they're going to write. And as I said, the first look at it that they thought was, well, that looks bright, you know, but it's small sample size and and I'll say this, it's a really crucial point because of the, I don't know, indeterminate natures might be a little strong, but
it is not exact like what we get out of a database.
Right. So the metric is actually usefulness, right? And so that makes the question you've asked right on point. So again, thank you for an excellent question.
Okay, next excellent question.
Maybe this one won't be so good.
For your ODM Dataverse example, what was the actual information / metadata analyzed to create the associations? Presumably the method looked at the structured metadata associated with each data set in Dataverse.
Yes.
Exactly.
If that assumption is correct, did you compare your results against any other clustering approaches, some of the other form of categorical analysis or factor analysis?
We haven't compared, but we said, we did an empirical study and showed it to some of the social science people, and they said, yeah, this is, so it was empirical comparison rather than a categorical comparison.
Right.
Is what we did.
Okay, a couple more questions here. Next one is, have any of the examples you've run so far revealed any data communities that were unexpected? For example, a novel insight into the knowledge implicit in the comparison of data communities.
Yeah, I think the one we got from the SysConnect people was really good. When we did that particular one, they came back and said, hey, this makes sense because the PIs are the same. They have a common co-PIs. Because of that, there is some common. They said people would have known about it, but it came out automatically through this clustering. They said that is a novel thing which it found out without us telling it to find it in that particular way.
So
it's an abstract information which came out.
Yeah.
In
so
a sense.
The potential for that kind of thing is pretty large. I mean, imagine running a network, and it's probably beyond our computational capabilities at the moment, but imagine running a network of, say, 2 or 3 million data sets, right? And doing a bunch of, not just clustering, but doing several levels of clustering to establish a 3 or 4 level hierarchy, right? Then you might find yourself seeing that different domains of science are connected in ways that you hadn't expected, and those results will have to wait.
Yeah, the clustering of scientific data sets is actually not done right now. People do like books and papers and stuff like that, they do. For example, if you go to the library, you have the library catalog, the type of thing, and then you can go and search based on their Dewey Decimal Index and things like that. We don't have anything like that for scientific data. The reason is that scientific data is pretty large and there is no really good ontology which can be applied readily to do something like that. And something like this is an automatic way of doing that type of clustering for you. So in a sense, we think the novelty of DataBridge comes from that type of automation rather than anything else. And is it going to give you the perfect way of doing it? No, not at all. Even the Dewey Decimal System is probably not the best way because it doesn't do everything. Yeah. By the way, I'm a library science person, so I can say bad things about it.
Okay.
Anybody else says you're going to be in trouble with me.
Yeah. You touched on this a bit already, but here's the next question. This is a very cool approach, and I appreciate the explanation of the approach as to start here. But can you take a specific example to explain what the graphs, numbers, etc. mean, with mean in quote marks? I get the basic idea of nearness means that they are similar, but can't I just use a keyword search and end up with the same basic results? What new information about the data communities come out of this analysis?
Well, if there's keywords, you might be able
you may be able to do that one too.
Yeah.
Actually, like I said, our signatures can be based on keyword vectors, right, or it can be based on, see, like if you look at the social science data, that needed keyword search only because the data itself is textual. But if you're looking at other data, like MRI data, the keyword search is not going to be helpful because the metadata is very minimal. You would like to actually look deeper into the image and maybe use some sort of a volumetric analysis or something like that to do the comparison between them. So that's where something like this, if you have an automation way of doing it, it'll help you.
Okay, I think that was the last of our questions.
Okay.
And we're just about out of time. So I'd like to once again thank Howard and Raja for their time and for presenting this excellent talk today. We greatly appreciate your time, and we appreciate the time of all the audience members who spent their lunch hour with us, lunch hour if they're on the East Coast. For those of you in the audience, remember that DataBytes is a monthly lunchtime webinar series put on by the National Consortium for Data Science. We are generally monthly, but we are taking the month of January off, and we'll start up again on Wednesday, February 7th. So look for information on that either on our website, or you can subscribe to get updates from us. Just go to datascienceconsortium.org. Also, all of our DataBytes webinars are archived there. And you just go to the program section and webinars are in there. So again, thank you, and thank you to our speakers, and everybody have a great holiday season. We'll see you next year.